weaponizing the dollar through threats. It's not tariffs, it's sanctioning. So yes, I think it does. And that really, to me, is part of the problem. You look at a currency that is, in essence, $200 trillion in debt. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions exceed $175 trillion in and of themselves, and they're off balance sheet. So we're $200 trillion in debt. We've weaponized and threatened countries if they don't follow our agenda. And yet we're trying to force people or countries to accept this currency. And that's not right, and that's not how the system ultimately works. So, yeah, I do think it's a problem, and I do think that is the way that the West has operated. You saw what happened as well.
The U.S. is weaponizing the dollar through sanctions rather than tariffs, which raises concerns. The financial system is under strain with an estimated $200 trillion in debt, including off-balance sheet obligations like Medicare, Social Security, and military pensions. At the same time, the U.S. pressures other countries to accept the dollar while using it as a tool for geopolitical influence. This approach is problematic and may challenge the long-term stability of the system. AndySchectman, a respected expert in precious metals and global finance, highlights the growing fiscal and monetary challenges facing the U.S., with soaring debt and increasing government spending, particularly in foreign conflicts. Despite efforts to regain control, the country is accumulating debt at an unsustainable rate, with projections indicating that by 2031, all income tax revenue will go toward paying interest and entitlement programs. This raises concerns about the nation's ability to maintain its global standing, as discretionary spending, including military funding, relies heavily on borrowing. The speaker stresses the need to question official narratives and remain open-minded about potential systemic shifts. Regarding former President Trump, Andy explores the possibility that he was brought in to oversee a financial reset, potentially introducing a digital ID system under the guise of election integrity. Ties to major organizations like the Rockefeller and Gates Foundations raise concerns about centralized control over personal data, finances, and health records. While Trump's return could restore cultural values for some, there is uncertainty about whether he is leading a patriotic resurgence or facilitating a broader surveillance agenda. The key question remains, is Trump a Trojan horse, or is he riding one? Join us as we break down these key insights in the video. If you find the content valuable, like the video and subscribe to our channel for the latest updates and analysis.
Reasons that the BRICS formed to begin with. So they had something called MBridge. They had a meeting several months earlier in Novigrad where Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil and the head of the New Development Bank, came out and said, we have agreed in principle, the BRICS nations, in a common settlement currency called the unit. It'll be 40% gold-backed. It'll be traded over Project MBridge. And to hear the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, the former president of Brazil, publicly say, in principle, we've agreed to this gold-backed settlement currency, which is redeemable by nation-states on demand, was huge. Project MBridge is something I've talked about for over a year, maybe two, and it was a development that is about 4 years long that was between China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates. And the technology is primarily Chinese. And it's operational. Saudi Arabia became the 5th full-time participant in it late last year. So now you have all of these countries and Saudi Arabia as a full-time participant on a cross-border payment system that the head of the BRICS New Development Bank said would trade a common settlement currency. It's a big deal. Now, what isn't talked about enough is that there was another player in all of this, and this is the Bank of International Settlements and their innovation hub. And that innovation hub was helping develop and integrate this into the Western system. And it was always kind of telling when, it was interesting when you would hear at their meeting that the BRICS didn't want to upend the whole system. They just wanted to make it more fair and to rewrite it, like a new Bretton Woods system, if you will, that they had aspirations of integrating with the IMF and the BIS and integration with the UN and all of these things that were surprising to me. And I probably should have paid closer attention to the fact that the BIS is a Western institution, because here's the espionage part of it all. At the 12th hour, after this MBridge is operational and was in use, China had the first 2 test trades in late 2023 where digital yuan cross-border with the UAE for delivery of gold and oil worked. It was operational. And at the 12th hour, the operating director of the BIS, Augustus Carstens, comes out and he says, we at the BIS have decided that we can't be involved in any project with countries that are being sanctioned by the West, so we're pulling out and pulling the plug on Enbridge. Instant gratification is not fast enough. And it's an interesting phenomenon, too. My mentor, Richard Russell, said, you make 7% a year, you're a rock star. And he wrote the Dow Theory newsletters for 60 years. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that gold is up 30% last year. It's beat the S&P 500. Over 25 years, it's averaged 9.9% appreciation. The S&P was 9.6 with dividends reinvested. It's doubled the 10-year Treasury. It's the tortoise, not the hare. It's not sexy enough, and it just slowly plots along. 30% this year, that Richard Russell would say you've outpaced the Rockstar portfolio 4 times. And yet, as Rick Rule will tell you downstairs, that 0.5% of allocation from Joe and Jane Sixpack to the Harvard Endowment Fund. There is so little participation in this country that people haven't noticed it. That they are all chasing the risk-on sexy trade, the NVIDIA, the Bitcoin, the Apple, the XRP, the things that very quickly can make you wealthy, but it ignores so much of the fundamentals of wealth creation and wealth preservation. It's creating a generation of people who think that type of market action is normal. And it's not. It isn't normal. This is not a new thing. I mean, there are manias, there are bubbles, there are ups, there are downs. And while this has been unbelievable to see the type of appreciation, I think it's being ignored by the value that gold brings, the extraordinary value, its extraordinary track record over the past 25 years and last year, and its woeful under allocation. It's interesting. So yeah, the public doesn't get it yet, hardly at all to that degree.
Andy exposed that the BRICS nations had been working on a new common settlement currency called the unit, which was planned to be 40% gold-backed and trade over the Project Cambridge system. This initiative, supported by the BRICS New Development Bank and led by figures like former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff, aimed to create a fairer financial system without completely upending the existing global order. Project M-Bridge, a cross-border payment system developed primarily by China in collaboration with Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE, became operational. Saudi Arabia joined as a full-time participant in late 2023. The Bank for International Settlements, BIS, was key in integrating this system into the broader Western financial framework, signaling a possible shift towards a new, more balanced monetary order. However, just as the system began to function, marked by successful digital yuan cross-border transactions for gold and oil between China and the UAE, the BIS abruptly withdrew its support. In a last-minute decision, BIS General Manager Augustin Carstens announced that the organization could not participate in projects involving countries under Western sanctions. This sudden move effectively shut down M-Bridge, raising questions about geopolitical influence over global financial infrastructure and the West's control over international monetary systems. Andy points out that many investors today chase fast, high-risk trades like NVIDIA, Bitcoin, and Apple, driven by a desire for instant gratification. However, veteran market analysts like Richard Russell emphasized steady, long-term gains, noting that even a 7% annual return is substantial. Despite its steady appreciation, rising 30% last year and outperforming the S&P 500 over 25 years, gold remains underappreciated. It has consistently doubled the returns of 10-year treasuries, yet few people allocate funds to it, favoring short-term speculative assets instead. This trend has created a generation that views extreme market moves as usual, ignoring the fundamentals of wealth preservation. Historically, markets experience cycles of booms and busts, yet gold has maintained its value through all of them. Despite its proven track record and reliability, gold remains significantly underallocated, with only a tiny fraction of institutional and retail investors recognizing its true potential. Now let's jump into the interview.
I think it's irrational to think that there won't be problems monetarily and fiscally. And the house that he's being left is really in disarray. Doge just came out and said we'll be lucky to get $1 trillion in deductions over the next few years, not 2. The first 2 months of this fiscal year, which were November, December, I believe, or October, November. Anyways, the first 2 months of the fiscal calendar for the government, the Treasury went into debt to a larger degree than any time in the history of this country. And so the spending is accelerating, as is the involvement in the Ukraine, the involvement in Syria. So many of the things that Trump is trying to do are being made difficult for him to achieve them, let alone a house that, we're creating, Charlotte, $100,000 worth of debt per second. 1, 2, 3, 4, keep on going. $1 trillion every 100 days. That fiscal irresponsibility, even if they balance the budget today, the Congressional Budget Office says by 2031, 100% of income tax will go just to pay interest on the debt and mandatory entitlement programs, which are off balance sheet. So how does a country remain the world superpower when everything like military is discretional and you have to borrow it? There is a problem with debt. And if I were completely honest and thinking outside the box, thinking what could happen, I'm not saying it's gonna, but I think, first of all, if you haven't learned over the last 4 years to question everything, you've learned nothing. Everything we were told largely was untrue to one degree or another. You must question everything. What better person to bring in to oversee a reset than President Trump? He's the master of the bankruptcy and reorganization. And in doing an interview with Francis Hunt, he speaks this way that, he told me he thought Trump was selected, not elected, that there are people pulling his strings, and he was brought in specifically to usher in a new digital surveillance state. Now, I'm not saying that this is what I believe, but what I'm saying is that there's a lot under the surface that is being ignored and needs to be addressed, and he's being left a house in great disarray. But I think we should all be optimistic that we get our culture back. And that's part of what Francis was saying, is that a lot of what we saw over the last 4 years was allowed to happen, and that he comes in overwhelmingly with the sense of patriotism to fix all of this stuff and usher in a surveillance state. I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, you watch, they'll issue a digital ID under the guise of election integrity. He just came out and said, we're going to issue the digital ID. Now, if you look at who's behind the digital ID 2020, it's the Rockefeller Foundation, it's the Gates Foundation, and I forgot, Canva, I think is the name. It's the big vaccine organization. And the technology behind that ties in your passport, your health records, eventually your financial records, and all of your information in one ID. I'm not saying that this is the case, but what I'm just simply saying is I think we all need to be open-minded, because the worst thing that we can do is trust that everything is going to be okay after last 4 years of insanity. These people are still there pulling the strings, and I guess I'll leave the question, because I don't know the answer, and I hope people don't get mad at me for saying it, but the question, and I said this in my presentation, is Trump the Trojan horse, or is he riding on the Trojan horse? And I guess we'll find out. But from a standpoint, I voted for him, and I'm thrilled he's here because I want my culture back. But from a standpoint of what it means in terms of issuing a central bank digital currency, could it be tied to gold and silver like Judy Shelton and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary? It's his largest holding. So maybe then he is riding on the Trojan horse. Or if he goes the other direction and issues a CBDC the way that the World Economic Forum wants, the United Nations, well, then he is a Trojan horse.
Understanding the forces shaping global markets is crucial in a rapidly shifting financial landscape. From the US dollar's role in geopolitical influence to BRICS' attempts at creating a new monetary system and the ongoing debate over digital surveillance, these developments will have lasting implications. Meanwhile, gold remains a historically reliable asset, yet it continues to be overlooked in favor of riskier investments. As economic uncertainties grow, staying informed and questioning mainstream narratives is more critical than ever. How will the rise of alternative financial systems like BRICS gold-backed currency impact the dominance of the US dollar? Could a shift toward digital currencies and centralized digital IDs lead to greater financial control or economic freedom? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video valuable, like it and subscribe for more insights. Thanks for watching and being part of the conversation.